Committee. Oh, thank you. I'm Councillor John Matheson. I'm chairing the meeting today. May I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use, that you do not interrupt other speakers, that if you're attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. And additionally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet, will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film or photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. If you are intending to do so, please you inform the committee clerk. Right. The attendance this morning, we have the Chief Executive, Arthur Charbonia. We have Melissa Evans, the Director for Finance and Procurement. We have John Snell, the Head of Internal Audit. We have Alicia Norman, who is the Lead Officer for Overview and Scrutiny. And we have Bethany Webb, the Government Support Officer. We also welcome Mark Hodgson and Vicky Chong here from Ernst & Young, our external auditors. Can I move to the agenda, please? Right, apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Adrian Marriott and we have Councillor Terry Lawrence substituting.
Thank you. Right. Have we any declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members? No, good. Right, then to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of March 2024, are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes? Could I have a proposer, please? Got those, thank you. Sorry, that's Councillor Hurren, Councillor Register. Then we need the electronic vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress.
John, just a point of order. We do have substitutes, I believe.
Oh, sorry, did I not say? How do we get past that one then? Sorry, we'll go back to it moment. Let's finish this vote first.
Thank you, Chair. That is 4 votes for and 5 abstentions. That's carried.
Thank you. Right, now, we've got, I think Bethany said we've got Councillor Lawrence here in place of, in place of Councillor Marriott. Right, just to clarify that, yeah, okay, good. Right, have we got any petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme?
None received, Chair.
Have we got any questions from the public?
None received, Chair.
Have we got any questions from councillors?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we're moving on to the first substantive item, which is co-opting non-elected independent members to the committee, which we've agreed previously to explore more fully. Right, I'd like to invite the Head of Internal Audit to introduce the report to the committee.
Chair, and good morning, members. This report follows a briefing paper I presented to this committee back in January, in which members were asked to discuss the proposal of co-opting 2 independent members onto this committee. To re-emphasise what I sort of said back in January, although it's not a statutory requirement, SIPFA guidance recognises that it's good practice for committees to include co-opted members, really to enhance the effectiveness and knowledge base of the role that this committee undertakes. So the proposal set out in this report would be that the co-opted members will be politically independent and will be bound by the Code of Conduct in the Council's Constitution. It is suggested that the co-opted members will be appointed for a 4-year term and that they may serve for a maximum of 2 terms only. The co-opted members would not be able to vote on any items considered by this committee. Remuneration and expenses for the co-opted members would also need to be considered by the Council's remuneration panel. Members should consider the skills and experience required for the position, and you'll find that in Appendix A I've provided a row profile for members to consider if you agree to this recommendation. If we look at putting an advert out, they're the sort of skill sets I think that we should be looking for to undertake this role. The co-opted persons would be appointed by this committee, and I'm suggesting that the interview panel would include both chairs, supported by the Section 151 officer and the monitoring officer. So happy to take any questions regarding this recommendation.
Questions?
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the person spec, recognising that this subject came up because we felt some of us were not financially astute enough to look at financial reports. The experience says financial management experience would be advantageous. I felt a bit worried about that, because I would like to see somebody with some financial expertise to be advising us. Thank you.
I mean, yes, certainly. I would support that view in terms it should be essential as opposed to, say, desirable. And maybe in terms of if it's agreeable, that the advert, once it's placed, emphasises that need to bolster up, obviously, that financial knowledge base.
Thank you, Chair.
Very quiet. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that point from Councillor McLaren, it says on there about the qualifications, there's no specific qualifications. When you've got a financial background, you know, it can range hugely from being a bookkeeper to doing treasury bits and pieces to being, you know, qualified chartered accountant and having years in a, you know, I think there needs to be some basic level of qualifications there because it is very different and it's such a stretchable spectrum.
Yeah, happy to take that on board. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Rees.
Well, I was going to say, is that a question or debate? Because we're supposed to be asking questions at the moment, and that sounds to me more like matter for debate as being a whole procedure.
At this stage, if we're concentrating on the job profile, I'm happy that that was a stab of mine that, you know, if I was looking, if I was sitting in your shoes, that's the type of skill sets I would expect or look for from any potential candidates coming forward. But as I said, at this stage, I'm happy to take on board your comments and add certainly around about the financial qualification, bolster that up in terms of any advert that obviously goes out.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Yes, because one of the things that,
One of the things that came up in January was the fact that we decided that to take this further or to make further decisions on it, we needed to have some kind of programme of training ourselves, because the question was, you know, do you think you're ready to carry on without further training, which is one of the things that's down here again now, do nothing, in the, you know, all the recommendation, carry on. I would like to see some kind of attempt to supply us with any training gaps first, and that doesn't seem to be offered to us here in this entire item.
Okay, it's unfortunate that Jan's not here, who's the head of Democratic Services. Maybe Alicia may be able to help and support me, but there's a whole raft of training that members would have undertaken initially once they'd been sworn in. Financial training, risk management training, but I'm quite happy to go back to Jan with your concerns to see what's on the programme coming forwards.
Yeah, because it was specifically to address any gaps that we felt as a committee that we had in our own knowledge base and training, and there seems to be that that hasn't joined up with this, you know, this second presentation of this. You know, it seems, oh, you know, if we keep on asking if you want to do this, you know, perhaps this will go away. But it's, you know, it hasn't. That particular question hasn't been addressed.
Okay, I'll take on board your comments, Councillor, and I'll report that back to Jan Robinson.
Yeah, perhaps I'd add that as it happened, we did actually discuss the question training in the pre-meeting this morning, and it's certainly on the agenda that we need some more. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to remember back to January when we discussed it last, but the question of why 2 rather than 1, is it just for resilience? I mean, I assume because the dates are in the diary so far advanced that we'd anticipate that both would be there the bulk of the time just because we're paying them. But, I mean, the recommendation says 2 as opposed to up to 2.
Yeah, the recommendation coming out from CITFA is 2 for resilience purposes.
Thank you. Any more questions? Right, so we'll just move to debate then, and what we're debating is the recommendation to agree the principle of co-opting 2 members as set out in the report. Right, it's Councillor Rees again.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say that given that we haven't had those things that were recommended, the provisions that we anticipated and asked for at the end of the January meeting, other than reconsideration, I think we should not opt for that recommendation. I think at this stage we should do nothing, as it were, except wait for proper training, because we haven't been given what we were asked for. And to take it any further seems to me to be taking it further by stealth rather than by deliberate move, should we say. Sorry, I didn't express that very well, but by a creep rather than a deliberate decision. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Register.
Yes, since we discussed this in last year, I've actually spoke to one of the independent members on Suffolk County Council's board, and it was quite an interesting conversation, and it became clear that their experience and knowledge adds to ours. Secondly, that I'm not entirely sure we need specific, well, maybe some of us need training and some of us may not because of our financial experience or business experience. And I'm fairly convinced this is a good idea and something we should move to very quickly. And I'm fairly sure there are people out there who could do this. I can actually think of several people.
Councillor Hurren.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just make the point that some of us have had reasonable training from, you know, the last 4 years, so I think we've got enough to do it. It may take quite a bit of time to do it, time the advert goes out, etc., etc., etc. We're probably thinking maybe early into next year by the time we actually get 1 or 2 in place. So that I would have thought there would be time to have some additional training. I don't think it's a problem. If we get an applicant who is not what we want, we have the option to say no. So there are safeguards there. And as there's 2 places, we have the option also of having different skills, I would think, financial, and it just depends whether we think what the person who applies has to offer and whether we need it. But it should be very positive, I would feel, and I think we need to start the ball rolling somewhere. So I think with those safeguards, it should be now. I appreciate Councillor Rees would like to deploy for a little time, but I don't think we need to. I think we've got enough tricks up our sleeves to guard ourselves, look for a right person, and it could take, all these things take longer than you anticipate, so hopefully they will dovetail. We're all on a fast learning curve, I appreciate that, but there are some of us here who have some skills to help the others, so I think we should go for it. And I'll certainly be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, just to support what my colleagues have been saying, I have to say all the training in the world won't make me into a city whiz kid. So I'll be very, very happy to have an independent member who can take on the detail, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm in full support of this. I think it's been sort of laid out well. Obviously, I understand why the qualifications and sort of the experience was dulled down. I think it's because it's the concern, are we going to find that person, you know, so not to restrict yourself too much, but, you know, with the hope we need to strive for getting that level of expertise really is quite important. But it was really also in relation to the training. I think it's quite important that before training packages sort of created for the members, that we get to see the content, the planned content for that training, and also potentially a poll. The current members, where are we at? What skills do we have? What kind of experience do we have? Where are our gaps? And if we could dovetail, like you were saying, so that then we can all come around the table and be in the right position, ready to go. So that would be my thoughts. Thank you.
Next.
I think I did say back in January that the experience I had sitting on the Suffolk County Council Pension Committee, where they had an independent person who probably had about 30 years of experience in the industry. So, you know, when he talked about things like 1992 Black Friday or whatever, you know, he'd lived through it. And it was not only the sort of background in terms of pensions, but the sort of wider knowledge of the economy and that sort of thing. So, although instinctively we might be against it, having had that experience on the County Pensions Committee, I could see the advantages, and I'd certainly be voting for it. My only thoughts were that I think that I think that up to 2 people would be a sort of sensible, and if there's only one candidate that really meets all the criteria, that would go for those. But you know, if there are 2 perfect candidates, take them on. But by saying, if you said up to 2 members, then, and we only put 1 on there, it wouldn't be seen as being a failure. That's just my own thoughts.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Rees. Oh, sorry, let's hear from Councillor McLaren first, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. One of the aims of this committee is to be effective on behalf of all the people that have put us here, and anything that enhances the competence of the committee is to be welcomed, and I fully support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say that if we're going to go ahead with this, up to 1 rather than up to 2, and if they're not somebody who's going to be voting, why are we going to be spending money on 2 people when 1 will do? We can always find ways and reasons to spend money, but I just think that if we're having somebody who is going to be looking at the detail and enhancing the effectiveness there, that's fine. Why would we need 2 when 1 will do?
Thank you. Yes. I think what I'm hearing is, broadly speaking, support, and the issue of getting the timing right in relation to the training that we recognise that we need. And then there's the question of one or two, and I think Mr. Snell has told us that that is, what was it, the LGA or for somebody's recommendation what was to look for two on the question of resilience, and presumably the recommendation will certainly allow us to appoint one if we don't think there's more than one good candidate. I can't see anything that's going to prevent that from happening. So I think, broadly speaking, I'm in favour of the recommendation going forward, but not too quickly. I don't know what would be realistic in terms of the cycle of the council and so forth. I mean, should we perhaps start thinking in terms of someone taking up the role, or two people taking up the role next March?
I'm happy to fit in with your own timetable. As I said, Councillor Rees has made a very valid point about obviously your own expertise and if there's any skills gaps, so we can dovetail that in. So, and I think obviously, if agreeable, then obviously there's another report that will go to full council for them to approve the appointment. Then we've got to talk about obviously the advertisement, getting sure that the advertisement's correct and asking the right questions. Then you've got the interview of the candidates, and that's depending when we get anybody coming in, because we might not, obviously. So yeah, before we know it, we could be into. So yeah, I think.
We should be able to get a couple of training sessions in before then.
Yeah, I'm happy to work on that time frame, Chair.
I also thought it's a question, actually.
If the matter goes to full council, would that only be on the person being appointed or the principal?
It's to approve the appointment of two.
Right, so it's to the point where we've got, okay, here's the person we've decided, and you yes or no to that person.
My understanding would be to actually, in principle, to agree for the committee, unless I'm going to be corrected by. Yeah. So in principle, that we would agree to the recommendation, i.e. that we go to look out for two co-opted members to come on to sit on this committee.
Right, so not the specific person having been chosen.
So, yeah.
Right, okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Right,
Yeah, sorry, very
clarification. One more from Councillor Whitehead.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to propose the recommendation, but to include both in 3.1 and 3.2, co-opting up to two in both cases, on the basis that if the committee, if the panel appointing finds two perfect candidates, yeah, then they'll take them on, but basically don't just feel the pressure. If there's one good candidate, not just get a, sort of not so good second one, if you understand what I'm saying. So by saying up to two, it gives us flexibility.
Recommendation with that slight adjustment. Does anyone like to second that? Councillor Lawrence would like to second it. Good. Are we okay for a vote then? My computer's gone to sleep. As amended and agreed by Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Lawrence, up to two.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that, so I
Oh.
vote against it. If I could just speak, John, Arthur and John will know. I think we're looking for permission to do this from our council. We can't do anything until the full council says yes. So I think I would be right on that, Arthur, wouldn't I? Once we've got that, then we start the ball rolling after that. That would be my reading of it. So we go from there. Believe you me, guys, it won't be that easy to appoint to just like that. It may take us, it could take us for a while, but we need the permission to do it. That's the starting point, and then we go from there. And everything else, we make a decision at the time. We might get somebody, or even two, who'll do it for nothing. People often, they're on a salary in retirement, or you know, probably more than most of us earn, a really professional person. So the financial implications may not, they may resolve themselves anyway. We may appoint one because that's all we can find, and we may appoint the second one sometimes later. So the vote is about starting the ball rolling, actually. You know, to say one or two is irrelevant. We've got to get it off the ground first, and then we make the choices for after. But once council says yes, then we have permission to appoint one or two, I would think, and they may not require a salary. That's my reading of it. If anyone wants to point me that's wrong, but that I would think is the procedure. Maybe John or Arthur could help.
Well, the recommendation is the principle, as Councillor Hurren says. I don't know beyond that whether you know, it's up to members to decide really. Councillor Rees got one more.
Thank you. Yeah, just on this question here, previously we've changed things and they've gone through. We've added something at this stage and asked for something to be changed. So I don't see what Councillor Hurren's point doesn't hold as much water as perhaps he'd like us to think. We have changed specific detail in the past, not just gone on principle. So I think that you can include what you were suggesting and what my colleague here, Councillor Whitehead, was saying. And seconded by our colleague Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, I think we should have the vote and
Because we've had a proposer and seconder
yes.
for the amended
yes,
motion,
as amended, up
vote
to
on.
two.
So at that point, we're just voting on the amendment, not the substantive paper. So we.
Oh, well, if you like,
I'm
yeah,
not too
okay.
sure that's quite right.
Well, well, procedurally, you're quite right, of course.
So I'm in favour of what's on the paper, but I'm not in favour of the amendment. So does that mean I have to vote against it?
Well, we can have
It
two
seem
votes.
that way, and then come back to the substantive one.
Yeah,
I'll see if I can help. I might not, but I'll see if I can help. So I think it's quite straightforward. I think the choice is whether you want two independent persons or one independent person. And I think what's been proposed as the amendment still allows for two independent persons, not one. And I think that's what Councillor Hurren is arguing for. And I think the amendment is quite clear in terms of simply saying you won't appoint one excellent person and one hanger-on. You will only appoint two if there are two excellent candidates. And I would interpret that in the event that you fail to appoint to a second candidate, we'd go back out to advert until we manage to appoint to a second candidate. So I think, members, you're all in danger of saying the same thing.
yeah, Councillor Howard, right. So, as amended, as amended, please vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That is 8 votes for and 1 against. That's carried.
Thank you. Right, the annual governance statement for 23-24. That's the year that ended in March. Chief Executive is going to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I will start, and then I suspect Mr Snell may add to what I have to say. So, members, you've got before you the annual governance report. Appreciate that for some members this will be the first time that they've seen this document in this format. Just to rest assured that every council produces one of these every year, and it is designed to be our governance framework and our sense of assurance against that governance framework. So how are we doing against that governance framework overall? And what the report seeks to do, and particularly the appendices, is describe that framework both in terms of the external factors, so the principles that we are obliged to comply with, and then what measures we have put in place as Baber and as Mid Suffolk to demonstrate our compliance with that. And then in addition to that, you've got a series of assurance statements from a series of different officers who hold different responsibilities within the authority, from monitoring officer to section 151 officer and so on and so forth, so that you can see where they feel assured or not in relation to that position against that wider framework. And you will see in each case where they have said where they are confident, but equally where they see further action is needed. And the whole point of this is it is a continuous process of improvement. It will never be done in terms of governance. In fact, if we were to sit here and say we have finished governance, then I would say, well, therefore we are failing by its very nature, because it will never be done. It's a constant revolving cycle. And then from page 68 onwards, you've then got a summary in the table there of the actions that were captured in the last annual governance statement, i.e. things that need to get done. And then in the right-hand column, the things that have been done. I appreciate it's always a slightly strange situation that we're sitting here in July and the report relates to a year that ended at the end of March. I don't know about you, but I carried on living beyond the end of March, but of course this is a cycle of annual year. So things that have happened in April, May and June and in July as well are not included within this report, but of course they exist. We're not trying to deny their presence. So that's the purpose of the report. It's there to make sure that you, as the committee, have also seen and have confidence in it, and ultimately, as you will have seen, it's signed off by myself and the two leaders. I don't know whether Mr. Snell wants to add a bit more detail.
Will be signed off. Questions, members? Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just going to really much endorse what our Chief Executive has said. It is a strange document in the sense that it does look backwards, but there is an element on terms of actions moving forward where we are actually starting to look forward. So what did we do in 22-23? What did we identify? Some of the areas that we needed to enhance on and strengthen, and those outcomes achieved on the right-hand column. What we've done in 22-23, but it is a little bit bizarre, particularly if you're not familiar with the AGS, that it is a backwards-looking document rather than necessarily a forward-looking document. But as the Chief Executive said, governance doesn't just stop, it continues, and as an authority, not only just officers, but you as members will be looking to enhance those governance arrangements to provide that level of assurance for your constituents.
Executive's got a little more to say.
Apologies. One more thing I should have said, and Mr. Snell's alluded to it to some extent. The other aspect, of course, is that governance doesn't exist in a bubble. It's not a static thing, it's a dynamic thing, and so you will see reflected in here the fact that this particular year that we're talking about was, of course, our election year, and we've had change of administrations, and so how that plays into our governance structures as well is relevant. I should have mentioned that already. Apologies.
No questions. Yes, there are. Right, Councillor McLaren, please.
Sorry, I put my microphone on. Thank you, Chair. Just a comment. It would have been helpful to see the names of the people, not necessarily in the report, but just see the names of the people who represent the parts of the report that have contributed to that. That would have been helpful, because I think we've had a lot of changes and we see different people, don't we, on this committee. So I think it would have been helpful, but a very comprehensive report. But I still, the first line of defence, I always feel is one of the major lines of defence, and that's from experience. I just want some some help with the measures that are in place for the staff that are on that first line of defence. In my experience, there are temps, interns, clerical teams, and those covering absences are often the ones who are seeing bits of information, where more senior managers are apart from that. What measures have we got in place to help our temporary staff or new people, that they are part of this process of audit? Thank you.
I can pick that up. Thank you, Councillor. I'm sure the Chief Executive will probably want to add something as well. Effectively, with new staff, interims, etc., there's a comprehensive induction programme as well that that they will have sight of, and they will be ticking off key documents, one of which will be around the annual governance statement, particularly around risk management, because that's one of the pillars of governance, and critical that it's not just management that are responsible for risk management, it's all the way through, including yourselves, right the way through the organisation. So there are programmes in place in terms of coming back to what Councillor Rees was saying about that induction and trying to get those skill gaps. So there is an induction programme which they would undertake, and that's signed off by their line managers as well. And there's also training right throughout the year, which the HR and OD department, and I can testify that because I'm constantly getting things I must go along and sign off and get my certificates. So there's that degree of learning as well that goes right through the organisation. So it's not just permanent staff, but as you quite rightly said, Councillor, it's to do with interims, consultants that come in as well to have that general understanding of what the organisation is all about.
Can I just, Chair, follow that up with a follow-up question? In this world of hybrid working, how easy is it to achieve what you're suggesting is happening? Thank you.
Most of our training is e-learning modules, so they can tap in, they can either do it in the office or they can do it in their home, and there's evidence of when they've undertaken that training. There's an indicator, particularly with, which will be picked up by HR and OD, that they've undertaken that training. As I said, there's a performance statement as well from the manager, their line manager, to sign off to say they've undertaken all the relevant training, they've read the documents, and hopefully they've fully understood them.
Yeah, Chief Executive.
Just to add briefly, on that latter point, I would say in the past there could have been a danger where we weren't in a hybrid environment of assuming that knowledge was there by virtue of presenteeism. I can see the person, therefore they must know this. Whereas in reality now managers have to absolutely make sure that is the case. And of course, we also had the interesting situation certainly prior to COVID and prior to moving to this site, where we were across two sites anyway. So we've always had an element of hybrid working from a corporate buildings perspective. Just on the interims front and the temporary staff, I've just gone through and double-checked. So of the assurance statements that you've got from the different members of staff within the document, only one of them was an interim member of staff. All of the others are permanent employees. And in the case of that one interim, that role has now become a permanent member of staff. So from that, I don't think that was quite your question, but just more broadly for people's assurance.
Yeah, I think I saw Councillor Baker next.
Thank you, Chair. I was referring to page 82, I think it is, on the report from the accountants in relation to the risks identified. And there was two main significant risks, and they're quite big ones. So it was referring to not being able to publish respective statements, and then a risk of significant weak. Sorry, which one am I on? I'm a bit further on, am I? Or I've kept going?
Yeah, you moved on to the other report.
Oh, I've kept going, have I? Sorry.
They do by their very nature, they're all about risk and assurance, but yes, but that is the next report, yes.
So, sorry, I kept going. Okay. So, also was looking at your pages, page 75. Have I gone too far ahead?
No.
Yeah, in relation to the actions and sort of the outcomes achieved, in relation to reports, is it possible to have some kind of schedule about timescales, about how, you know, these are the things that actions captured in 22-23, outcomes achieved, and things that you plan to do for the year ahead, so that, you know, we've got some idea of what the schedule, what the strategy is, what, you know, how that's kind of looking, because they're big things to tackle. So that's really my question.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, very good point, Councillor, and that's something I'll take on board, so we can actually precisely, and you can hold us to account in terms of if we've achieved those or not, or provide you with explanations where we haven't actually made the target dates. But that's a very valid point, and I'll include that as we move forward.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, please.
I would just like to say that, in my view, the word opinion that's used in the index and throughout the documentation from the directors is rather a weak word. We're looking for assurance. Is it possible to change where we've got opinions in the index for each of these directors, and within the text of each of their opinions, as it states, that that word could be changed for assurance to give us some greater comfort. It's a stronger word.
Yeah, we tend to use opinion as it's the professional judgment of the officer gives an opinion as to the level of assurance, but yeah, I can certainly consider, I can have a look at some other AGS documents from other authorities as well to establish what terms. I've come across some where they use the word opinion. We've used it historically, but that's not to say that we still use that as we're moving forward. So yeah, I can give that due consideration, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. The first one's perhaps a pedantic one, but is there a reason why it's not called a joint annual governance statement as opposed to, because it is the two councils? And the second question, which is a bit more into detail, is, you know, in terms of the opinions expressed, I just wonder, and I ask it as a sort of neutral question, whether the opinions expressed in here perhaps do truly reflect the dire state of the Mid-Suffolk HRA.
So in terms of whether it's joint or not, again, happy to call it whatever you want us to call it in that respect. It is annual governance statement, but you're absolutely right. It's on behalf of both councils, so it could be called the joint annual governance statement. In terms of the reflection of the housing revenue account for Mid-Suffolk, I might ask the Section 151 officer if she wants to add anything on that front. Of course, it's looking backwards, so at a point in time, which has a bearing on it. But it equally needs to not be read in isolation from other documents. So, for example, the Section 151 officer's statement of assurance that goes with the budget, for example, and also the quarterly performance reports and finance reports and so on and so forth. But I don't know whether the Minister wants to add.
Questions? Yes, Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not actually a question. Well, it is a question, actually. Back to this thing about opinion, the use of the word opinion. I'm just wondering maybe it would be worth using opinion with a capital O to reflect a professional opinion, like, for example, a legal opinion, which might lend the weight of that meaning to the document rather than the assurance possibility. Is it something that you were looking into, that you said you'd look into?
Sense of that I've got is that you know, this is the jargon we usually use and have used for a long time. Do other councils do anything different?
So effectively, these are assurance statements by each of those officers. Happy to call them whatever you think is of best weight in that sense. I would agree entirely. They are their professional opinions, hence phrased in that way. We'll have a look at it for future years.
Yeah, I mean, are we out of line with other people is what I'm asking, really.
Yes, certainly the statements I've looked at around Suffolk and a few outside of Suffolk tend to use the word opinion an awful lot. In terms of, as I said, coming back to it's the professional opinion of that officer. But as the Chief Exec said, you know, if you feel strongly that that's not the correct word, I can easily change it.
Thank you. Right, if there are no more questions, then we move to a debate, basically, which is asking us to approve this or otherwise, isn't it? Try and find it again. Anybody? Make a start? No? Nobody? Oh, Councillor Hurren, marvellous.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just wondered what the life of this document is from now on, because it reads quite well. You know, you could improve it like a summary, but I just wonder, it'll go to full council, obviously, and become part of our Bible, but is there any ambition to publish it further? Maybe send a copy to clerks of parish councils and things, so they're at least aware of what our aims are. Maybe parish councils should know what we're up to, what our ambitions are. Would that be possible? Otherwise it just sits in the lost here, should we say. It could be made a really good, readable public document, and I just wondered what the ambition for it would be from now.
Do we publish it beyond this committee's paperwork?
So it goes on our website. It's a statutory document, and as Melissa, the Section 151 will testify, that it accompanies the statement of accounts, and that will be on our website. What I would, if I may take this opportunity, is ask, once this has all been signed off, I will be pushing this through to right across the organisation for all members, not just this committee. I think it's a key document that all members should read. And taking up on your point, Councillor Hurren, I would strongly urge you, if you wish to go to the town councils, parish councils, spread the word, because I think it's important for them as well to understand what we're about as an organisation, assurances that we provide, that you can then disseminate that down through the parish councils and you said your own constituents.
Thank you. Does anybody want to debate? Councillor Register wants to debate. Jolly good.
Following on from what John just said, I think this is something that all members should signpost to parish and town councils in their regular reports to those councils, because it's not something that I can imagine I'm a town councillor in Sudbury, I can't imagine any of our committees discussing it in depth, but it's something that is useful for anybody who's interested, as it were.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I was just thinking about on sort of the first, third person, sort of the tense that's used on this. So on those pages, sort of 70, 71, it's got those two columns and it says outcomes achieved during 23-24. But when you read some of the narrative, it's talking about future and it's talking about sort of current time. So I'm just thinking about the headings in relation to some of the narrative. It's sort of what period of time are we in? What is it talking about that? So I was just getting myself in a little bit of a pickle. It was just a comment, really.
I think, to be honest, as I said, it's not the easiest documents to read in terms of the timing, because as I said, the majority of it is looking backwards, and yet you've got something that's sort of looking forwards. And if for the uninitiated, unless you're really into governance, you might struggle to understand exactly where we are in any precise time. All I can emphasise is again, coming back to what the Chief Executive said, governance just doesn't stop today. It continues, but certainly the tenses, we can look at that, particularly to give the reader a better understanding of where we are at any point in time.
Thank you. Well, just to remind you, the recommendations are on page 19, and apart from you satisfying yourselves or ourselves that it reflects what we've been doing, it also gives the monitoring officer and the joint chairs and the leaders the opportunity of correcting any minor amendments, typos and so on and so forth, and after which it will be signed off by the three people's pictures you can see somewhere in there. So are we okay to move to a vote on that? We've got a proposal, I think, first. Does anyone want to propose this recommendations? Councillor McLaren would like to. Anybody like to second it? Councillor Dowling, thank you very much.
Just quickly, John, on recommendation 3, it's rather prospective. It says her, and given there's a change, maybe it should just say them.
They.
They, yes, just for good order, then you won't have to think about it again. And it covers everything, just a point of order, really.
Yes, that's done. Okay, are we all right to vote on that then? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. you, Chair. That is 9 votes for. That's carried.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm Mark Hodgson. I'm audit partner at Ernst & Young, and I'm accompanied by Vicky, who is the manager on the engagement. And I thought I'd provide a little bit of context to where the local audit is first, and then that will help place where this report sits in that arena. So there's long reported delays in local audit have gone through the select committee and a number of national reports, which led to some consultations in February about how the government proposed to reset the local audit market and then recover the local audit market by way of introducing audit backstops, which meant if you had not completed any audits up to and including the 22-23 financial year, then the auditor would move to end that audit and then move on to focus on 23-24 financial year audits as the most recent financial information available. Those consultations concluded in early March with the proposal that legislation would then be taken through Parliament to enact a backstop date, with the proposal for the 30th of September this year being that backstop date. But the general election was then called at the time that legislation was about to be put before Parliament and therefore could not be put before Parliament. And clearly we have a change in leadership now with the Labour Party coming into play. What is understood is that there was cross-party support for the proposals pre-election, and therefore we would hope, though nobody knows for sure, that the Labour Party would be taking forward those proposals subsequent to the general election. Equally, we know that there's probably not enough parliamentary time now before summer recess to enact that legislation, and therefore it will be enacted in whatever form it takes post-summer recess. So the timeline for this is moving out when it's clearly not helpful to be moving in that direction. So sitting here, we don't know what date legislation would be put before Parliament and therefore passed, and we don't know therefore what date a backstop would be if that is the way government still wishes to pursue. As a firm, we've had a very clear strategy which we've shared with all Section 151 officers in our client base about what we're going to be focusing on. So through to 22-23, we have set out that we would be completing all of our responsibilities in relation to value for money reporting, because it sets out the underlying arrangements a council has in place for conducting its business, and therefore key assurance to members and the public that those underlying arrangements either were or were not in place in a key period, irrespective of whether there were financial statements that were subject to audit. And this is why you've got a report here today which covers the 3 years which have not had an audit opinion issued to date. So that covers the reset, and then moving into the recovery phase, which would be focusing on 23-24 audits, we would be looking to do all of our code responsibilities, both on value for money and the financial statements, if time allows, through to whatever backstop date comes into play for that period. And I'm happy to expand more upon any of that context for you or answer any questions. In terms of the report before you this morning, this is our interim value for money report. It is badged interim because as auditors we have to consider any changes to those arrangements or implications for those up to the point we sign our audit opinion in relation to the respective years they relate. And clearly we don't know what point that would be as we sit here today, so it is interim through to that point. That being said, we wouldn't expect much to change within it, but just those caveats around it. So on page 82 of your pack, the way value for money reporting works, and appreciating that this is the first time you've seen value for money reporting in this form under the new Code of Audit Responsibilities issued by the National Audit Office. The auditor identifies whether there are any risks that there could be weaknesses in the authority's arrangements, then performs work and then concludes whether there were underlying weaknesses in those arrangements. The beauty of this report, if you like, is it brings together both the risks and the conclusions at the same time. So when we were commencing the work, we identified that there was a risk of weakness in relation to the publication of the draft accounts in relation to financial year 22-23. And there were potential risks to weaknesses in relation to internal control for contract management. As a result of our work, and on page 83 of your pack, we set out the outcome, and that those risks did manifest themselves, and there were underlying weaknesses in both authorities' arrangements for producing financial statements by the due publication date set out by the accountant audit regulations, which impacts the governance criteria. And then there were issues in relation to internal controls over contract management and procedures to ensure compliance with laws and regulations within that procurement process, which impacts the improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness criteria. There's then detailed commentary about those findings on pages 86 to 91 of your pack. And then Appendix A to the pack sets out the entire underlying arrangements and our commentary against each of those for the Council across all 3 financial years from 2021. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of where we are. So that would mean we would report by exception that the Council did have weaknesses in its arrangements when we issue our audit report across those years, and then that would be finally reported in an auditor's annual report, albeit covering 3 years, at the point we issue that audit opinion. So happy to pause there and take any questions on the context or the detail of the report.
Thank you. Right, any Councillor Registers first in there?
Yeah, so reference to page 82, report page 6, but repeated throughout this report. It says the delays were caused by staffing pressure and the need to prioritise on budget setting processes. Is this inferring that the failure to deliver the audited accounts for 2020 onwards until 22-23 are down to staff shortages at Baber Mid Suffolk rather than failures in staffing resources at Ernst & Young? And the other question is, are there other local authorities in the same that you have contracts that are also delayed in such a way? And is it always their fault because they don't have the staff resources, or is it the fact that your company doesn't have the resources to complete the work?
2 good questions. And part of the context, I think, is important to understand. So the backlogs that have driven us to this point as a sector, both on the preparer side and on the auditor side, there was a point where there were some audit shortages in, I think it was 2017-18, which caused an issue for that year's timeline. But subsequent to that, there have been other pressures on the sector, such as COVID, such as additional financial reporting requirements on infrastructure assets, and the dearth of qualified accountants per se for both councils and auditors, which has led us to almost the perfect storm where we found ourselves kind of 18 months ago, which prompted ministerial action around reset and recovery that I talked about. So there were delays to 2021 audit. We had tried a number of times to be able to conclude that audit and were unable to do so, culminating last summer. There were then pressures on the council's side for producing 22-23 accounts, and this weakness refers to the weaknesses to the shortages at the council and focusing on core council business such as budget setting at the time rather than being able to prepare draft financial accounts. And then your second question was, is this the case at other councils? And the answer is yes. So this is a national issue across the majority of English local authorities, and I think only 9% of authorities at the 30th of September last year had been able to have a 22-23 audit completed.
Thank you. Yeah, totally agree with everything Mark said there. And just to kind of add some context to it, we had a number of key people retire. One of those was due to ill health, which we didn't have a plan for because we didn't know it was coming. So we have lost some key members of the team that would have been working on the statement of accounts, I think it's fair to say. And we've had challenges recruiting to my previous role, which was the head of finance role. So I'm back out to recruit again now with that, hoping to get somebody permanent in that position. But I had to take the difficult decision as to whether to prioritise the budgets or the statement of accounts. And linked to the audit work, I think it's fair to say it's not just the preparation of the statement of accounts. There's a lot of work that then follows on when Vicky and her team come in to do the follow-up work as well. So we need to make sure we have the resources there to deliver that. But I think I'd say to members here this morning, rest assured that we are doing a complete review of all of the processes and all of the outputs within the finance team, and we are going to do a complete restructure of the team to make sure we've got all of the roles and responsibilities right and we've got the right qualifications and skills needed to deliver this. So I'm taking this very seriously, and we are looking to have a new structure in place by the 1st of April to address some of these gaps we've got in the team.
Councillor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair. So that's great that obviously a big, shift with staff. The thing is with accountancy and with times, it doesn't stop. So whilst you're in a process of trying to catch up and structure the team, time's moving on, accountancy still, your figures still roll. So, just thinking ahead, is there a point that you're going to be able to put a line in the sand and say, okay, we know we've got to deal with that. Do we need to have a task force? Do we need to get an agency staff to deal with those years potentially before? Because you can't do everything. Your existing team are not going to be able to catch up. That's a lot of work. Just thinking about a line in the sand and the strategy for the year ahead. So you've got your financial year, when your budgets are required, when your statement of accounts are coming in, to make sure that the deadlines are met, so to make sure that the future years don't get behind. Is there a possibility that the team, you can organise the strategy for the year ahead that stays on task? Obviously figures are carried forward, so you never can quite clear that off. But you've got your year, but actually get a task force to deal with those previous years, because I think otherwise it's just going to be a long, protracted catch-up.
Yeah, we have actually got an interim in at the moment who is working on those 2 years of statement of accounts that we haven't published. So yeah, we'll be looking to see whether we need him for any longer or whether we can then build that back into the new structure of the team. So we'll look at both options just to make sure we've got that covered going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I did want to ask on the broader point of what balance we are at the moment as between permanent staff and interim staff dealing with accounts matters.
I think it's a combination of the two. So we have got obviously some permanent members that will need to be here to do that work going forward. But because the statement of accounts work spreads across so much of the team, it is a mixture of some permanent members and some interims as well. But yeah, we will be reviewing that. But a lot of it does sit still with the core team for that audit work going forward. So we've still got the knowledge there within the team to be able to.
I mean, what's the current balance between how many interims we've got and how many
off the top of my head, I don't want to quote a number, but I'm happy to give that outside of the meeting.
Good with that, thank you. Well, I don't think there's any vote or anything required at the end of this. This is an interim update so that you are acquainted with where we're up to, basically. Councillor Whitehead.
Yes, could I just have, thank you, Chair. Could I just have clarification in terms of the statements of accounts, which have been published in terms of any drafts on websites? Or I know I could sort of look it up, but have we got draft published accounts on the website? Or because it says on page 82, and it reads rather strange. It says the unaudited statement of accounts are yet published at the date of this report. So as you know, should that read as not yet published? Because it doesn't make sense, that sentence actually.
I think it's missing a yet to be, so I'm happy to amend that. 22, 23 and 23, 24 are yet to be published.
Even in draft?
Even in draft.
Okay.
Thank Thank you. So this gets a bit confusing. How many sets of accounts are fit to go to the auditors, basically, and how many are not yet completed by the council and ready to go? I think that's something it sounds as if we're behind just as much as the auditors, doesn't it? Is that correct?
Yeah, so we've got 2 years of accounts still to publish, the 22, 23 and 23, 24, but the other year, 2020, 21 is published and ready to be audited.
That's it. That's the one.
Yeah.
I was just going to, on that point, just sort of mention, obviously, the accountancy firm, you have your year schedule of clients that you would deal with, and there's an allotted time for different organisations that you would fit in and different work. And of course, whenever we're behind, that will then shift your schedule, so therefore that they won't have the space to do it. So it's this sort of like very finite dance, isn't it, between how to make that work. And that was what I was talking about, the schedule ahead. Okay, we've got that line in the sand so that you can keep to your schedule, so that you can fit in. Do you see what I mean? So it's that's what I'm concerned about. So this is actually quite a delicate, important thing to juggle. That's all I was going to comment.
That's probably the best description I've heard of it. So thank you. You're right, we only have a finite amount of resource available to us, and we only have a finite number of slots for all our clients to go into in local audit. We have moved slots around to try and accommodate not only this council but other councils to get through as much as we can. But as you say, there are only so many, and once we run out of time, and there's other sectors such as the National Health Service or NAO audits to do, then it is a calendar year, and we can't move that to that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's probably just worth mentioning at this point, we are going to have to change the forward plan. We're not going to manage to get the draft statement of accounts to the 19th of August meeting, so it's probably just relevant at this point to say that. We'll get to it eventually at the end of the agenda, but thank you. Right, anybody else think we're all right to move forward from there? Right, well. Right. Yes. Yeah. If we don't particularly press you to stay for the complaints monitoring report session, if you don't want to, if we could take a 5-minute break now, shall we? I'd like to invite the Head of Internal Audit to introduce this report on, on complaints monitoring.
Thank you, Chair. So the report that you have in front of you provides an overview of the Code of Conduct complaints that have been received and determined at both district and town and parish council level over the municipal year. I would remind councillors that the precise details of each complaint cannot be discussed as they will remain confidential, but I can obviously ask questions or answer questions, about generalised codes of conduct that pass across to the MO's desk. In total, the MO received 48 Code of Conduct complaints against councillors in Baber and Mid Suffolk at both district, town and parish council level. The table at 4.7, which I believe is page 104, shows that of the 48 complaints received, 11, which represents 23%, were upheld, 28, representing 58%, were dismissed, and 9, representing 9%, where the code was not engaged. Note in terms of the difference between dismissed and code not engaged, where the code's not being engaged means that the complaint is not actually a breach, or it actually falls outside the MO's remit, just for clarification on those two areas. Where complaints have been upheld and a breach has been identified, the MO has issued appropriate sanctions. This might come from an apology or where further training is required. I'm happy at this stage, rather than going through each of the tables, just to take any questions that you may have at this point. Thank you.
Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just ask, do complaints seem to be on the increase? I perhaps ought to have looked at this myself, but what's the trend as far as the numbers of complaints received generally, please?
Sorry, thank you, Councillor. So the number of complaints has risen this year compared to last year. So last year we had 36. We've got 48, as I say, in this period. And I think that represents an increase of about 33%. This has largely been due to escalating issues at 3 parish councils. I think when I've spoken to the monitoring officer, she doesn't see this as an increase as being too alarming at this stage, because where you get 1 or 2 issues, you'll get multiple complaints coming in about something similar, but we have to treat them individually, so sometimes that will skew the results a little bit.
Can I come back, please? Over sort of 5 or 10 years, what's the trend, please?
I don't have those figures, sorry, Councillor, but I can ask the monitoring officer, supported by Alicia, to pull out figures, what we do hold, and happy to report those back to you.
Right, perhaps we could have a email to all the committee members in due course on that. And one other point of order, we did change the constitution a while ago, and I would like to be referred to as chair rather than chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. You may have answered this partly in the last statement by saying you've got difficulties in 3 parishes. What interested me was that there's 36 complaints in Bayberg and only 12 in comparison in Mid Suffolk. Is this a reflection on the councils and the parishes there, or people complain more in Bayberg than they do in Mid Suffolk?
I couldn't possibly answer that. I think it's just a case of what comes through onto our desk. You might, as I say, we might have one particular issue that's very, very sensitive in one particular parish for town council, and as I said earlier, that can sometimes skew the results, and as I say, each of those complaints have to be dealt with individually. I wouldn't read too much necessarily the difference in comparing like with unlike in this case. It may be that we've just got 1 or 2 issues in one particular district than we do have in the other, but that could change today or tomorrow, God forbid,
Thank you, Chair. Given this obvious rise in complaints, whether it's one council or both councils, does that mean that we've got to review the resources we've got within the democratic services to deal with this? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Councillor. And sometimes we have to issue statements to the complainants to say that actually because of the sheer volume that we're actually experiencing, that our normal terms of responding could be delayed. But as you say, you don't know what's going to come across your desk the next day. We might have a lull, and then something might happen within a particular parish or a town council that causes all sorts of mayhem, and then we're having to deal and sort of firefight those. So, but we have, I'm going to embarrass Alicia, but we have a very capable officer here that keeps certainly Jan and myself when I was the DMO on our toes, and obviously that's something that Tom Barker, who will be the new MO, will need to address if it comes too much of a burden.
Thank you. I was just wondering if the increase could have been in part to do with a change in sort of policy or procedure on the part of the council, because in Suffolk County they had a push on complaints management, and they had tuition for staff, and they had new policies, and what that did is teach staff what's a complaint, what's a concern, how is it reported, and because of that, more training, there is going to be more complaints. I don't know if there'd been a shift in any way, anything sort of similar.
I think the subtle difference, if you like, between a code of conduct complaint and a complaint is a code of conduct complaint is around about your sort of behaviour as councillors, whether it's at district level, town or parish. The one thing I would say is slightly disappointing in many instances where I think from the frustration of an officer point of view is the default position for many people making a complaint is, I don't want to resolve it myself, I'll therefore put a code of conduct complaint in. And from our point of view, I would encourage, whether it's members of the public or a district councillor or a district council or what have you, to try and resolve that first before you come knocking at our door. I know it's sometimes difficult and they're difficult conversations, but then it makes it easier to come to us to try and resolve. And unfortunately, yes, once we get a code of conduct complaint on our desk, yes, we have to deal with it in one way or another. But from our point of view, we would very much like it to try and be resolved amicably from a local point of view, as opposed to coming directly to us, because that's the easy option.
I think we are basically debating whether to note this report.
What we're going to be voting on here. 103. What?
This information.
Okay. It's just that, yeah, that's fine. It's just that. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Well, we are going to move to a vote then, please.
If we're going to vote on it, we need a proposer and seconder.
Hmm?
If we're going to vote on it, we need a proposer and seconder.
Oh, yes, a good point. Yes, would someone like to propose and second this? Right, Councillor Register. And did I see anybody else? Oh, Councillor Whitehead. Thank you. Good point.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Councillor Harron, may I take your vote verbally, please? Councillor Rees, may I take your vote verbally?
Okay, for voting.
Thank you, Chair. That is 9 votes for. That's carried.
Thank you very much. Right. We now need to discuss as follows. To consider whether pursuant to Part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public should be excluded from the meeting for the business specified below on the grounds that if the public were present during this item, it is likely there will be disclosure to them of exempt information as indicated against the item. The author of the report proposed to be considered in Part 2 of the agenda is satisfied that the public interest is in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Thank you. I've got Councillor Hurren and Councillor McLaren. Thank you. Right, we can manage here with a show of hands. Those in favour?
Yeah, that's carried.
Thank you. And those against? Those abstaining? One abstention on that. Thank you. Right, so if we could stop the live stream, please. Councillor Hurren. Your seconder. Councillor Register. Thank you. Right, if you'd like to read the...
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations that the committee are going to be voting on are as follows. That the Joint Audit and Standards Committee reviews the process that has been undertaken by the monitoring officer and recommend proposals for the improvement of that process. That the following amendments be made to Appendix C of the report. That the new additions for anonymous complaints be amended to read. The monitoring officer will not normally consider anonymous complaints except in circumstances where doing so will not obstruct the complaints process. That the new additions for conflict of interest be amended to read. That when referring to an officer of another authority, referral must be sought within 10 working days of the initial assessment. And the final recommendation is that the monitoring officer reviews the use of self-referral and brings their findings to the committee within 6 months.
Everybody all right on that? Right, we'll have a formal electronic vote on that one.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Councillor Hurren, may I take your vote verbally, please? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. That is 9 votes for. That's carried.
Right, now I think the final thing we need to look at is the forward plan. Certainly hope it's so. Right, item 14, the forward plan is on page 255. So we're going to hear from the finance boss first.
Yeah, do you want me to? Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of changes, and I think they were alluded to earlier, is the draft statement of accounts will not be coming to your meeting later in August. We will delay that until the 28th of October, because we have made a commitment that we'll publish the statement of accounts by the end of August, so they wouldn't be in time for your 19th of August meeting. And then following on from that, no briefing note on the progress being made on preparing the statement of accounts, because I think you heard from Mark from EY this morning, so hopefully that's given you an updated position, and we'll wait for the legislation to be laid and then come back with an update once we know furthermore.
Thank you. Presumably if the government miraculously comes back into session and makes a decision about that. I mean, they may informally say that they're going to do it, I suppose, which anyway, you'll tell us if that happens, won't you? Yeah, right. So with those changes, is that all in order? I think that need to be proposed? No. Just noted. Councillor Whitehead.
Could we add to the 23rd of December the monitoring officer bringing back the self-referral one, so it's actually on the schedule, because we said within 6 months, didn't we? So
yeah, when did we say that was going to happen? 6 months. Yeah, so we can add that on somewhere.
I know, wouldn't it, January?
Bethany will put it in appropriately. Is that all right? Okay. Well, I would...
Yes, I did raise this morning and a briefing. There ought to be some sort of training worked into this calendar at some point. We did agree at a couple of meetings ago. It seemed like probably January. And I think Jane Robinson had got something in train, but not sure what. If it could just be added loosely, the training should be available, or maybe something set up for the future. So it need adding into the work plan at some point.
Right. Right. Well, I thank you all very much for your very diligent, very long contributions. And yes, thank you. Meeting is closed.